wonder, even though Italy has a lot of rivers, it has some problems because, according to the Observatory for Climate Change of the United Nations, the per capita water consumption in Italy is at 125 liters a day, 215 liters per day. The European average is 125, and we have a loss from aqueducts of 42%. So we only 10% of rainfalls are collected, and only 5% of rain water runoffs is treated and reutilized. Only 1% is desalinized, and in Spain it is 7%. 4 billion euros have been allocated under the National Recovery Plan. And in Italy, so there's a national plan of recovery and resilience in Italy um, was allocated to the restoration and enhancement of historical gardens. So funds were allocated to vocational training and the census of historical gardens, and especially restoration enhancement. 100 million euros have been allocated to great greatly attracting gardens, for example, Reggio di Caserta, Real Bosco di Capodimonti, e Villa Favorite in Ercolano. So these are the major attractors, Reggia di Caserta, Real Bosco di Capodimonte. I'm sorry, I don't have the time to enter into the details. Villa Lante in Bagnaia, Villa Pisani in Stra, and Villa Favorita in Herculaneum. But the most interesting thing was the call of 119 million to finance restoration projects. So on March 15th of 2022, 1,081 projects were submitted, but only a few were selected, and so 800 were selected, and 129 projects obtained funds ranging from 200,000 to 2 million euros, according to the complexity of the project. Most of these projects will have to be completed by 2024, and is it okay? It's not my fault. So most projects will have to be completed by 2024, and all will have to be completed by 2026, because this is envisaged under the European law. So public and private gardens obtain funds. Uh, um, there were many evaluation criteria, especially the focus on climate change and the reduction in consumption of energy sources. So this is a call for the restoration of parks and gardens. So the project had to include a search for tools and solutions to ensure the sustainability of interventions, considering climate change, environmental problems, and the opportunities coming from new technologies. It was necessary to uh, ensure and fulfill management criteria with the limited use of resources in order to introduce systems to reduce water and energy consumption, and also the use of eco-compatible technologies and materials, and was asked to try and improve the environmental and the landscape context, even outside of the garden, and foresee a controlled and limited use of resources. So the gardens that receive um, the highest amount of funds, Villa Barberino di Mari Pizzoni, Val San Sibia, near Padua, where water is a fundamental element. There are water games, fountains. This is a bird's eye view, the number of reservoirs. And so the role of water is fundamental because there are streams, fountains, pools in the 90s. There is a recirculation system to recover 60% of the water use, but over time the situation has deteriorated due to the reduced sources of water from springs. So this is the large alley with the main building, and you see the fountain. Unfortunately, today the fountain is no longer operational. Fountains are operated only under exceptional conditions because they cannot afford to use water on a continuous basis to produce these water effects. So this situation is very painful. So the owner has decided to reduce the water effects, but he was obliged to make this choice. The role of water is very important in this villa. It is enormous, but you also see that the level of water in the pools has gone down. Look at this fountain. This was the level of the water. And you see now that the level is lower. And there's a photo was taken during the winter when generally there is no drought or heat. This is Isola dei Conigli, the rabbit island. And so all the water all around the pool is full of mud. So what are the solutions proposed? The cleaning of the trenches to facilitate the flow of the water, the restoration of historical water implants and systems, and the recovery of existing sources and springs, a new artesian well, and new reservoirs to collect rainwater, and then more efficient irrigation systems, the use of drones with targeted treatments, and the reduction in the number of products used, and also a system of sensors to understand whether water is still in the soil. This is another particular villa, Villa Durazzo Pallavicini near Genoa. It is 150 meters above the sea level. You see the sea. It is full of water, lakes, streams. We have water everywhere. Uh, Well, these villas are absolutely wonderful. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to enter the details. So these are the new projects, a new recirculation system with two water reservoirs, and then the restoration of the artificial rivers that have disappeared, the treatment of the water of the lake, and the control of humidity. And this is very important. And you see what they're doing. to try and use rainwater, and they use ecological material, so water can be channeled without damaging the soil. And now this is another garden in the south, in the central Italy. Nympha is the name of the river, of the stream. So in fact, this is a garden on water. So Nympha is water. It is one of the most beautiful gardens in the world. It is relatively recent, between the 800s and 900s, but water plays a fundamental role. You see some more manages, some more images, so you wish to go to Nympha. So water, water everywhere. So springs are no longer so powerful. At the level of the water table is lower. So systematic monitoring systems and the water treatment practices that will have to be created. So an experimental irrigation system is planned with the collection of rainwater and also treatment systems. In this case, to a whole series of interventions. A Villa d'Este in Tivoli. This is a very important project. A friend and colleague, and Bucciati will talk about it. And you see the importance of water in this garden. And Andrea is going to talk about this particular villa. So these are the actions planned. Andrea will talk about them. Another garden that received funds is in Marche. It is very particular. It was created in the 1800s by a German landscape architect. And this garden was also affected by the earthquake, which provoked a lot of damage in the area. So some walls crumbled. And now there is a restoration work underway with the restoration of the channel to collect rainwater, and also the recovery of water reservoirs introduced by Luigi Winter, and before they had been buried, and then a new targeted and monitored irrigation system that, according to the project, is expected to reduce water consumption by at least 30%. And now this is the last garden at the foot of the Etna volcano. This is a private garden. This garden was created on lava, on the lava that arrived in 1440. This is a pond, but you see the lava rocks. And in this garden, there is the last part of the original forest that covered the whole Etna Mountain. So a very particular garden. So you see the lava. According to me, it's incredible to have a garden that has a sign of the past that is so evident. And there are some ponds. Uh, so what are the planned actions? Here, private garden. So um, to make the water treatment in the ponds more efficient with water consumption reduction by 25%, the recovery of the ancient reservoirs, and the restoration of the channels, water channels that were used in Arab nations. Since Sicily was dominated by the Arabs, so there is this presence of this old system. And then gene banks of the ancient cultivars resistant to drought in order to allow the garden to survive during the drought. These are images of the garden. These are the so-called saie, so water channels. These are like chutes that could be used to channel water um, in the direction desired. They are being restored as a system of channels. And then the ancient cultivars, the so-called the bottle-shaped tree because it can store water and it is drought resistant. So, what is the what are the common elements these gardens? So there is a fundamental element. The objective is to combine new technologies, new monitoring systems, the recycle of water, and the control systems, and the return to the tradition. For example, reservoirs, water treatment, um, the use of rainwater, and over time, these traditions were lost. According to me, this is very important. The fact of putting together and reconciling what technologies allow us to do, so how to save resources and manage resources at best, at the same time, not to lose the historical heritage and historical knowledge we have accumulated over centuries. And according to me, this is a wonderful message to convey, in addition to the fact of being proud that with the European funds, so Italy allocated 300 million euros for gardens. Now there are now training courses for gardeners who are artistic and historical gardens. And this is important because historical gardens will die if they don't have specialized skills. And we are also um, launching a census of heritage in the field of gardens. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much to Alberta Campitelli for this extremely interesting lecture. Alberta is president of the Scientific Committee for Museums of the Ministry of Culture in Italy. And it has been a great way to introduce the afternoon session of our work, much more focused on the challenges of historic gardens with the specific topic of water. Is something that we, all of us, have to face with it. And I'm pleased to introduce the next lecturer, Andrea Bruciati, director of Villa Adriana and Villa d'Este Institute, with a lecture on the topic, The Shapes of Water, Le Ville di Tivoli. Thank you very much.
avanti questo, giusto? Allora, buonasera a tutti. Credo di avere la fortuna.
I think I have the fortune of managing places with absolute beauty. Today's presentation will focus on the fact that what is presented is a true ecosystem. Villa d'Este is just the last piece of a culture of water that characterizes the area of Tivoli. Tivoli was born thanks to Aniene, that is one of the main rivers in Rome. So 4 of the 9 aqueducts of Rome come from the Aniene Valley. So for a total of 75% of water. So this is a true ecosystem where water is queen. And since Roman times, this environment has featured rich villas because the air and water were very clean. And today I would like to show you these places from another point of view because apparently these places don't seem to be connected. But when we talk about Villa d'Este, we have to start talking about the gardens of the Este family, the so-called Delizia in the 1400s. So 1 century before the birth of Villa d'Este, the humanistic culture of the Este house found its greatest expression in the so-called Delizia. So stately residences in which an attempt was made to propose again the magnificence of ancient villas with a perfect merge between naturalized environment and an antiquarian ideology. From an architectural point of view, this was based on water regulation for a perfect and refined symbiosis. This is one of the very few frescoes of the Baggioioso Castle. This is in front of Sala delle Vigne. This is about 15, 20, or 30. And all the elements I mentioned, landscape elements and water elements, characterize this region. We should not forget that Emilia-Romagna is a region that was subjected to a strict control of water reservoirs because these were areas full of marshes, full of stagnating water. But the Este family, so between the 15th and the 16th century in Ferrara, created a lot of gardens and also the literary man Ariosto talked about it. So we have to say that Villa d'Este was born in view of a metamorphosis in order to change the environment and the landscape and naturalized environment that changes over the seasons, but also during the day and even in the night. Because the villa became the world of Circe. As Ariosto described in Orlando Furiosa, there are some paintings showing this landscape, a fanciful and imaginary landscape, and you see a magical, and this is a magical painting by Il Garofalo. And you see the area of Tivoli is characterized by villas and also ancient Roman remnants. This is the view by Luigi Rossini at the beginning of the 19th century. And this is the landscape. The area where the Villa d'Este was built. So Tivoli is famous, was famous during the Grand Tour for its falls. This is the so-called Antro della Sibilla. This is a painting by Jonathan von Roda, a Swiss painter. Tivoli became the preferred stopover of the Grand Tour because it featured ancient Roman remnants and ruins and with the sublime landscape made of water. This is another painting. So there's the engraving. This is an aqueduct within the so-called Villa di Mecenate in Tivoli. Villa di Mecenate is the third site of the Villa Institute. It is called now the sanctuary of Ercole Vincitore, but until the 1500s, it was considered Augustus' villa, and now and then Mecenate's villa. And as you can see, the element of water is flowing along the colonnade. That reminds of the great aqueducts of the area. All these elements enter into the characteristic elements of Villa d'Este. This is Santuario di Ercole Vincitore. And so there is a kind of scenic front on the Aniene River. And in the past, these were arches through which water was flowing. This is a representation by Piranesi, and on the left, the same area of Santuario di Ercole Vincitore. And inside this area, thanks to the water at the end of the 1500s, there were workshops to create weapons. So the water was channeled to produce energy. So this is another photo at the end of the 1800s. So you see what you could admire from the other side. And you could just see this kind of aqueduct with all these holes. And this is another engraving of a fundamental text focusing on ancient ruins and the naturalized environment. This was printed in Venice, and you see that research that was carried out in Rome at the end of the 1400s on the recovery of ancient ruins, and ruins become the most important path. This is the so-called Parco Marittimo that I showed you in the video. I just wanted to show you a video at the beginning because according to me, one of the fundamental uh, elements of this garden is an emotional element. If you get into a historical garden, you can have an immersive experience, an aesthetic experience. So I'm asked why we do not intensify the experience from a technological point of view, but those who come to Villa d'Este or to Villa Adriani, they enter into another reality, also from a perception point of view, and water plays a major role. I would like to show you, in this case, the iconographic match with what we could see of it, the part in the water dates back to the 50s. So Villa Adriana is like a villa that was rediscovered in the 1400s. It's like an Angkor Wat of Cambodia, because all the people come to the villa and have to deal with snakes and glass. This is an area that became wild, but there were very important remnants, many of which were lost over the centuries. So the perception of Villa Adriana, at least up to the 1700s, was an extremely different perception. But this also from an iconographic and also technological point of view, this was the driver of Villa d'Este. This is the famous stufetta of 1516 of Cardinal Bibbiena. That was conceived by Raffaello, and on April the 4th, in 1516, together with Pietro Bembo, who was the secretary of the Pope, and also Agostino Beazzano, who was a humanist, and the botanical Andrea Baggero and Caldassar Bastiglione, and they went to see the remnants of Villa Adriana. So Raffaello went out of the city and went to see Villa Adriana because he understood perfectly well that Villa Adriana was a water-based villa. So it was important to look at Villa Adriana to be able to recover the images of water-based villas for modern ones. This is the so-called Canopo, and these are the so-called the large thermobats of Villa Adriana, and a bird's eye view. And then this is the image taken from the ground. And the interesting thing of Villa Adriana is that we don't have an Imperium or a real thermal bath system that is just related to water, but everything is multiplied. Even the thermal baths are manifold, 5 thermal baths. So this is an extraordinary villa where everything was exaggerated, and technology was used for the famous water games for the vertical representation of water. These are the so-called small thermal baths. These are some of the ancient channels. So the Aniene River was actually used by boats, and so the famous Travertino stone was transported by river. But the villa was in a wonderful position because they could use the water of this river, and it is also very close to the thermal waters of Tivoli. So it is a wonderful synthesis of water from any point of view. This is the fish pool, and also from an architectural point of view, it's empty because we're actually working on it. We would like to put water back, because having an empty fish pond is just sad. But you see, these are horizontal reservoirs, and you see, and Hippolytus II recreated these water reservoirs. And this is Santuario Vercolo Vincitore. So you have these large holes, and there were these water coming out as uh, waterfalls. And this is the view of Villa d'Este from Santuario di Ercole Vincitore. And you see how the different horizontal planes were created in the low part of the villa. And they remind of an aqueduct. So another memento of water that we find also in Santuario di Ercole Vincitore, which is below Villa d'Este. And this is the courtyard of Villa d'Este. This is the statue of Ariana sleeping that comes from Villa Adriana, but it is put into another context, and with an ancient look, always related to water. And we also have photos of indoor frescoes. This is another engraving, always from the book I mentioned before. And you see that even within this fundamental book for the Renaissance is the idea of metamorphosis. And in this case, the shift from the tree to the human nature conveys the image that plants are vital, and they belong to the macrocosmos of humans. And you see, this is inside the villa. There is always the element of water represented. These are some frescoes dating back to 1560, 1570. Villa d'Este was opened in 1572. And you see, even the frescoes always show the ancient archaeology that was characteristic of that part of Italy. These are paintings within Villa d'Este. You see the rivers, the Aniene River and the Tiber River. And they can be seen in the Villa Adriana Museum. And these, so we have the Tiber and the Nilus. And this is a series of pictures of fountains, and you see this beautiful fountain. There is the idea of a circular structure, and they link Villa d'Este to the remnants of Villa Adriana. So within the hemicycle, there is another canal, and these are the cultural sources of inspiration. There's a famous painting by Mantegna at the Louvre Museum. And you see, there is the idea of multiplying architectural elements with water. And this is the famous the Path of the 100 Fountains, always in Villa d'Este. Oh, this is so-called Rometta. This was an area dedicated to Rome, because it looks west towards Rome. And there's the so-called Fountain of Dragons. It is as if the garden is the main road. This is the center of the axis of the garden, and the villa is on top. So this is the first vertical garden of the modern time. And you see, you have fountains, little streams, staircases. So this is the real architecture. Water becomes architecture. Villa d'Este. These are some of the photos that I showed you in the video. And the element water is seen in all its shapes and dimensions. And also today, you can always see that there are links with Villa Adriana. These are the so-called mete, the very few ones that remained. This is in the plain area. And this is one of the last images. This is Mother Nature, and water is source of life. And we really hope that this is a reminder of the current tragic situation that we are experiencing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this extraordinary trip around the shapes of water of Le Ville di Tivoli. And because the time is running, I'm pleased to introduce the next lecturer, Agnieszka Hersek. I don't know if I spell it right, but you will apologize me. President of the Hungarian Garden Heritage Foundation, with a lecture on the topic, The Actual Treasure, Water, the Current Matters of Our Garden Heritage. Thank you, Anish.
Thank you very much. It's a very big question. What can we do this time, the water system, and if you have or not water in our historic garden? But isn't not only a question for the garden, also the landscape. In the life of the earth and in the cultural history of mankind, there have always been ecological and climatic changes that have affected the survival of the given culture. Culture with organic landscape cultures build their societies on the law of nature, by cultivating the landscape in a way that maintains social functioning and keeps the landscape in a dynamic balance. Gardens and garden arts also reflected the attitude of the time, responding to challenges by integrating and applying innovations, for instance, in the water supply of gardens. The interest and passion for collecting non-native plant species is also an ecological experiment. This is also the case in Hungary, which has a continental climate, but the biodiverse landscape, the micro and mesoclimatic condition had given the opportunity to introduce plants from other landscapes into horticulture and to infiltrate to everyday life, urban parks and public spaces. Sorry, how can sorry. The landscape of Carpathian Basin, that is singly ecological unit, belong to the singly watershed and interfluvial culture along the river Danube and Tisa. Until the emergence of system of large estates in the early 18th century, it was characterized by floodplain farming, where the water from spring floods was retained by a system of canals and ditches, forming the complex ecological system. The great river management intervention at the Tisa and Danube in the 19th century allowed the development of large arable fields and large-scale grain production system had a serious consequence that still cause problem today. Sorry. Okay. You can see the, for example, the Tisa River regulation before and after, or the Danube River regulation before and after, and the little rivers also the same system after the 19th century. The rapid drainage of the water result in the raise of the height of the dikes along the rivers, inland flooding, while summer drought have led to the loss of water from the landscape. Today, we need to rethink how to interpret the principle of the former floodplain management as a heritage in land use and ecological management, and how to apply them in a modernism way adapted to the actual conditions. The historical heritage of water management and use needs to be researched, its experience understood and rethought. You can see the so-called floodplain farming and the creation of the vernal floods and the balance between the summer droughts. You know that in the early Renaissance period, the artists and people have also interest for the water and water system, as here in Leonardo drawing. Can you look? Not also in the landscape, that in the air also. In this period, in early Renaissance, the Hungarian king Matthias has a lot of and very intensive contact with Florence architects and artists and the family Medicis. In this period, the king built the center of kingdom in Buda, and it was the big problem, the water in the Buda castle. The water supply was a weak point of the defense of Buda, so a complex water supply system was developed with the help of Florentine masters. Camicia, who studied in Sangallo workshop here in Florence, and is mentioned by Giorgio Vasari, and it's I am very happy that I can here speak about Giorgio Vasari in his work read about Camicia, the lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects' work. him as he was a designer and builder of palaces, gardens, fountains, churches, fortresses, ponds, baths, aqueducts, mechanical elevators, and other important buildings. You can see here the King Matthias and the Summer Palace, Visegrad, near the Danube, not far from Buda. We know that the Renaissance water supply system were adaptation of the ancient Roman water supply system, which in turn were adaptation of Persian ones. This was the basis of the knowledge of the Moors, which also influenced the European masters. In the case of Buddha, in addition to the wells of the caves deep in the hill, rainwater was also collected as reported later by the Turkish traveler Evliya Çelebi in the middle of the 17th century, who arrived in Buda after its occupation by the Ottomans. And he read, in this city, Buda, there are 107 cellar cisterns and the rainwater running off the roofs, it's collected in all these cisterns. In the royal palace, a large reservoir was dug and built in the belly of the hill to retain the summer and winter rainfall, and the Cisterna Regia was topped by hanging gardens. All water and snow ran off from roofs and yards has been collected. Moreover, the water from the Danube was lifted on large lifting wells to the terrace at the foot of the hill Buda, from where it was transported up to the royal palace in underground tunnels on donkey backs. They also used the water of upland streams, as the Buddha chapter recalls in 1503. The late King Matthias wanted certain stream to be artificially diverted from the surrounding of Buda through the hill to the fish pond surrounding the garden under the castle. But even that was not enough. From the karst spring of the Buda Hills, water was piped in 12 kilometers of 5 glazed clay pipes to the palace country yards and gardens. You can see the springs in Buda Hills, and here is the Buda castle. Since the springs were higher in level, this way they could power the huge Renaissance fountains on the castle square, which every traveler to Buda reported with enchantment. The water were kept in large marble basins, the piscinas. The piscinas full of fish were also important for the food supply. Using the water of the karst springs again would be of great benefit for the revitalization of the Buda Castle garden. So you can see the opportunity. Since to this day, they provide good quality and large quantities of water, but flow unused into the drainage system now. A research and feasibility study is in progress that the initiative and enthusiastic researcher and water lawyer. Of course, it's very difficult task even today when we are struggling with water storages to push through such a project. You can see the construction in Buda by Kings Matthias, some pictures. In the life of Hungarian garden art and garden design after the Renaissance, the Baroque, the English landscape garden, and then the historicism period also sought for means of water supply or drainage. Those garden and landscape history are closely linked to the history of water engineering and its profession. One exemplar is the Baroque Rococo Garden Esterházy, Professor Fekete spoke about, where Miklós Esterházy, the splendid, created the second largest French Baroque Rococo garden in Europe, the easternmost, with this French designer Nicolas Jacobi, in the marshy and westernmost steppe area of Lake Fertő and Hanság. You can see the old, there's Albert also have this picture, and now the water system. Okay. The next very important historical element, the system of canals and the creek help to maintain the optimal water supply. The landscape garden of Tata, you can see, where the history of the springs, lakes, a water system shaped by the former and landscape gardens, stretches from Roman times through the Middle Age, Renaissance, and Baroque. Sámuel Mikovinyi, the mathematician, engineer, and founder of Hungarian cartography, played a major role in the draining the marshes of Tata and surrounding area, and in regulation of the lake, Nagy Lake and Cseke Lake. The master of boreholes in Hungary was Vilmos Zsigmondy, a mining engineer. He was the first to explore thermal water researches, and he drilled boreholes in several important parks and castle gardens. For example, on Margaret Island and in the City Park in Budapest. The thermal water were used to establish baths and greenhouses also. Overall, the lesson is that the garden's heritage contains many innovations that are still relevant today, and that they have a role to play in revitalizing and sharing this experience. It's why the next Mőcsényi conference in Esterházy in this years, the conference theme is the garden heritage, garden art, and the water element, and we focused these questions. And I would like to invite you all to participate and give a presentation this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Agnes. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce you now our colleague, Paola Ruggeri, curator of the architectural heritage of the Boboli Gardens. So we every day work together with Paola. We are extremely pleased to introduce her lecture. Thank you very much, Paola. On the topic, the restoration of the island pond and Neptune's fountain in Boboli Gardens, an approach towards sustainability. Thank you.
Mm. Condividi. No, torna indietro. Per sempre. No, no, torna alla prima. Io tocco solo qua. Perfetto. Buonasera a tutti.
Ladies and
Allora,
gentlemen. My presentation will focus on the restoration of the water games and the fountains in the Boboli Gardens. So this is a project that combines different projects in order to recover the water, but also to optimize the water resources in the garden. So let's start from the first consideration because this is an international conference. It is also important to share what our problems are, but also our requirements. According to recent studies on the influence of regional climate trends on agricultural crops from 2010 to 2022 in Tuscany, the drought has consistently affected, with particular peaks, the provinces of Florence, Arezzo, Pisa, and Livorno. It is evident that the increase in water stress conditions can be totally attributed to the drop in rainfalls, as well as the fact that the 2022 summer season was the driest in the last 12 years. So we started our projects trying to understand the needs of our garden. So some questions that we raised before planning solutions in order to understand the problems that we had to deal with in the restoration of the fountains, for example. How is it possible to prevent the drought from affecting the phytosanitary conditions of the vegetation, but also the regular functioning of the water irrigation systems, as well as the operation of monumental fountains, an integral and substantial part of Boboli's water architecture. How can a preventive risk management protocol be activated in adverse weather conditions? Heavy rain in a short time frame, in many cases accompanied by wind, with risk indices that are beyond the science of meteorology. Moreover, how can the garden be protected from fire, especially in the hottest months of the year, July, August, when temperatures reach as high as 45 degrees Celsius? What are the right agronomic choices to safeguard Boboli's countless plant collections at this time of climate change? How can adequate soil conditions be ensured to preserve the water and nutrient retention capacity of the soil? In an attempt to give an answer to these questions, let us try to list some actions that we have undertaken in recent years by the management, curatorial, and technical staff of the Uffizi Galleries within the framework of a preventive and planned maintenance protocol and specific and exhaustive restoration projects due to also insufficient financial investments. So the solution to this complex and systematic problem has been postponed for too many years. These problems required a multidisciplinary design approach with the contribution of various scientific skills from different institutes, not only the Ministry of Culture, but also research centers, universities, and professionals, in order to find an articulated, unequivocal answer to the solution of problems that are complex by their nature, such as a historical garden is, which is an algebraic sum of nature, art, and architecture. So water is becoming an increasingly precious and problematic commodity for Boboli to find, conserve, and manage. In this sense, the projects and works currently underway have as their primary objective to enhance every possible source of water supply, implement new water storage strategies, and avoid serious instability and degradation caused by heavy rainfall on the slopes and paths of the park. However, the value of water as a laboratory character of the work is unquestionable. The perception of the fountains of the island and Neptune today strongly conditioned and penalized by the lack of this aesthetic corollary that gave dynamism and lightness, bestowing on the entire context a formal aesthetic value that has been admired and narrated by visitors from all ages. That's why we would like to restore these water games. And this is coupled with the need for general modernization and upgrading of the water supply and disposal and irrigation system. The projects we are going to illustrate, therefore, involve solving problems upstream all related to the concept of water as a resource, but also as an element to be controlled in order to preserve the garden and its stone and plant components. The interventions are planned in the Boboli 2030 Master Plan presented in August 2022, and they are divided into three macro groups. In the first group, we have projects in which water is analyzed as a resource. In the second group, there are projects in which water is analyzed as a problem, but also as an opportunity for possible solutions. And in the third group, projects in which the water sign is restored to its natural character. These are ongoing projects, water as an essential resource for the preservation of the garden. This is a list, and then I will just enter into the details of some projects because of time constraints. First of all, the recovery and rationalization of historical springs, specifically the recovery of water from 3 springs whose water had been dispersed over time, new water supplies using natural sources, the construction of 2 artesian wells, the construction of a new rainwater collection and storage system in order to recover large volumes of water, the reclamation of the 2 reservoirs, Isola and Nettuno, with mechanical removal of debris and mud from the bottom, and the introduction of water treatment systems in reservoirs and the protection of fish. 2 systems compared from research to field application. Then expansion of the irrigated areas, which is possible due to the increased availability of water from natural sources. In the second group, we have water as a problem, but also as an opportunity for a possible solution. So restoring the unity of the sculptures that are integral part of the water architecture, the problem of the authenticity of the garden and its element, the original sculpture and the copy. Restoration of fountains and sculptures and the protection of these from water. Water games at night, new possibilities of enhancing the garden and fire safety preventive measures, solutions to counteract disruption caused by increasingly heavy rainfall. And then water as an element of the garden identity, as a celebratory character of the garden, restoration of the functionality of the fountains and water features in the Isola and Neptune areas. So I would like to mention some projects in order to give you an idea of what it means to exploit and preserve water historical garden. The recovery of springs probably features a number of natural springs that in ancient times were the only source of water supply of the garden. Over the years, the waters of 4 springs out of a total number of 7 were not used with water leaking into the sewage system. The Cani, the Cupolina, the Amphitheatro Springs, the Sauro Spring, the Mina Spring. While the water from the Sauro Spring was already recovered in 2020, in 2024, we are going to recover the water from another 3 springs. It is estimated that the above-mentioned interventions will be able to substantially contribute to an average daily water supply within the hydraulic system of the Bubbly Gardens of approximately 22,000 liters per day. In the picture, you can clearly see the number of water catchments in the area of Bobole. That is why the garden was created in this area. And on the right, you see a picture of the tunnel through which the spring water is channeled, in this case, the Mina spring. And then the construction of wells. Bear in mind that we have estimated that in the near future, Bubbly's annual water requirements for irrigation purposes will be 2,000 cubic meters per hectare, or a volume of water corresponding to 23,000 cubic meters per year. So we opted for the construction of 2 artesian wells located into 2 distinct points of the garden, one in the Neptune area and one in the Isola area. The water requirement is calibrated on a total area to be irrigated that amounts to approximately 92,000 square meters. The geological information coming from the investigations conducted allow us to assume the presence of stones called Pietraforte, at least up to a depth of 150 meters from ground level. So we therefore are going to find rock masses of high permeability to intense fracturing. These are associated with significant aquifers that will be exploited by means of catchment works. As far as the Neptune area is concerned, we think we're going to find the catchment at the depth of 75 meters. As far as the island area, probably since the geological information available allows us to assume that we are going to have alluvial deposits with sandy and gravelly levels with a thickness of approximately more than 20 ml. A new drainage technique will be introduced in the planned catchment works with a new drainage technique for water wells and the use of glass spheres in the well instead of traditional gravel in order to reduce maintenance costs by inhibiting the formation of biofilms and incrustations and minimizing iron and manganese deposition processes, as well as conferring higher mechanical and chemical resistance. Thus, we are going to invest more at the beginning, but we are going to offset this with lower maintenance costs. And then water treatment. It is now unfortunately frequent that during the hottest months of the year, both the reservoirs of the areas of the island and Neptune are subjected to extensive and persistent development of algae that deteriorate the appearance of the water, and taking into account that the water content in the Isola Basin is estimated to be 11,000 cubic meters, and the Neptune Basin is approximately 3,000 cubic meters. The objective of the experiments is mainly focused on reducing the eutrophication of the water, but also the reduction of sedimentation on the bottom with organic material due to fish as well as the surrounding vegetation. The result to be pursued is the improvement of the aesthetic element, also the health of visitors and works of art, because this water lapse sculptural works with an immense historical and artistic value. Since the cost of the eutrophication of the water in the basin is to be found in the considerable presence of organic matter in the reservoir as well as in the poor oxygenation of the water, we decided to implement an adequate system to ensure that the correct amount of dissolved oxygen is present in the water. A first trial protocol was implemented in the summer of 2021. The experiment was conducted with a pilot plant in the tank located below the ocean fountain in partial communication with the island reservoir. At the heart of the system, there is the introduction of a portable hydrogen peroxide dispenser that ensures the correct supply of oxygen inside the tank. This operation takes place by withdrawing water from the tank and filtering it through a fast filter to remove a coarse floating material, then a second filter to remove sand, then further sterilization by means of an ultraviolet lamp, and finally treatment with a hydrogen peroxide and return of the treated water into the tank. And the whole system is based on a closed circuit operation with a special pump. The objective of improving the appearance of the water with the system has certainly been achieved in this test that was carried out in the hottest months of the year. At the end of the test, in qualitative terms, the suspended soils and turbid soils have completely disappeared so that it is possible to see the bottom of the tank below the water, while the visibility at the beginning was nil. So the experimentation conducted over a period of 3 weeks has allowed us to evaluate the operating costs determined by the use of the system in the overall volume of the reservoir. It is important to introduce new technologies, but we have to see whether the operating costs are not prohibitive. Sometimes it is not possible. That is why this is an opportunity to carry out studies and research. So how to use these new opportunities in these particular situations. And then another experiment that we are carrying out now, and if tomorrow you're going to visit the Neptune's basin, there is a little machine, and so we've studied not a chemical process described above, but a second monitoring campaign, this time using a physical process to enrich water with the necessary oxygen, but also to reduce the organic load present on the bottom until complete inertization. While the inertization of the bottom is achieved by adding photosynthetic bacterial agents introduced in appropriate doses and at specific time intervals, water resignation is obtained by introducing a machine equipped with a gas injection technology that uses oxygen-enriched air to produce a constant and concentrated flow of nanobubbles that provide a constant source of oxygenation to the water. Once the nanobubbles are injected, they are effectively distributed throughout the water column of the water body, providing oxygen and a mild oxidative impact to the sediment layer. From what has been observed in case studies in European and non-European contexts, it can be deduced that the oxygen brought by nanobubbles leads to a similar result of the use of hydrogen peroxide, thus improving water clarity and the general health of the water body, even in shallow waters such as those of the island and of the Neptune. The experiment, which is still in progress, will also include the introduction of 3 Japanese carps to monitor the living conditions and proliferation of the fish. Of course, we know that there are fish, but we don't know how many and what types of fish because we do not understand the kind of life we have in the water. So these Japanese carps will help us monitor the situation. In addition, some stone samples will be taken and sampled in order to control the parameters inherent to the degradation in relation to the quality of the appropriately treated water, because the water, this kind of water then touches the sculptures. Now, water is a problem. Restoration of the sculptures, the original or the copy. Is it a sculpture or is it a fountain? There are numerous sculptures in the Isola and Neptune complex. So we have an articulated program of interventions with the aim of maintaining the sculptures in situ compatible with the state of conservation of each sculpture. So it's possible to recreate sculptural copies to be placed or to replace original sculptures when statues are in particularly critical condition from a conservation point of view. Therefore, in order to avoid the danger of the loss of these objects, we've decided to replace original sculptures with some copies and placing the original sculptures in storages. In the slide, we see the digital survey campaign of Sodor Lorenz's Neptune for the plant production of the bronze copy. On the basis of an in-depth study carried out by art historians and restoration workers who saw that it is absolutely necessary to introduce a copy of this sculpture, which is already a copy because the original was put in the storage of the Boboli Gardens. In the following slides, we see the representation of the Andromeda and Perseus sculptures in their original context, and also in the storage during the digital survey campaign for the planned production of marble copies. So these are two very important and beautiful statues. We all miss them, and they will be placed back with copies of the same material. This is Perseus, the two characteristic elements of the island. It is rich in important sculptures. Always water is a problem, and the possible solutions are to prevent the deterioration of pavements. The avenues surrounding the Eastern Neptune basins are made of beaten earth with river stone gravel. This type of path, so the typical bubbly garden avenues, is partly responsible for the eutrophication of the water in the two basins and the formation of silt on the bottom. In fact, during barely more than ordinary rainfall, the slope of the surfaces causes the underlying gravel and organic material to flow into the basins without any treatment. To avoid this phenomenon, and in view of the installation of a new water treatment system, and also to optimize the recovery of rainwater for irrigation purposes, we decided to introduce various paving solutions. In some cases, we decided to replace existing driveway with a stabilized base of washed stone, attributing fundamental property of not being permeable to water and not being removable by rainwater flows. At the same time, we wanted to build a special drainage network, as can be seen in this Isola sector, and the network will deliver all the water collected in the underground descending chambers, which have the purpose of separating and retaining the storm materials present in the rainwater before the rainwater goes into the basin of the Isola. In other cases, such as the pedestrian walkways along the Neptune Road network, which is now highly uneven, a draining pavement of stabilized gravel laid dry on a base consisting of modular honeycomb retaining panels made of recycled polypropylene. So water as identity, the setting for water games. On the island, in addition to the well-known fountain of oceans and rivers, there were the fountains of loves and hobbies with their respective fountains of ships. In addition, there was a fountain of the star and the fountain of the balustrade around the island. Jets of water spouted from the nozzles and cascaded into the basin to great scenic and acoustic effect. With a view to restoring, optimizing the water features, a new hydraulic network is planned capable of supplying water to all the fountains by drawing water from the island's basin, thus creating a closed circuit that ensures minimum water consumption. So the fountain of the ocean has 6 nozzles whose adduction pipes are directly installed inside the sculptural group. 3 of these emerge from 3 jugs are supported by as many figures. The other 3 are placed at the center of the base between each of the 3 figures representing rivers. The water flowing from the 6 jets falls into a large basin, which is then overflows into the basin below, which has an overflow connected to the basin of the island. This is a picture of what could be the final result. Similarly to the fountain of the ocean, also from the fountains of the harpies and the lovers, 8 in number, distributed over the 4 cardinal points of the island's basins, water gushes from nozzles that emerge directly from the sculptural groups, which are in turn fed by pipes inside the statues. So let's come to the fountain of the balustrade, but we lost its memory because they have not been working for such a long time. Views from 1652 and 1783 of the Isola Basin show the existence of a water feature that had not been active for several decades, formed by 100 or so jets that departing from the top of the iron balustrade fell into the basin was certainly a fascinating scenic effect. The nozzles for setting the jets are still visible on the top of the balustrade, made of brass of various diameters, and they are placed at the head of the railing posts at a ratio of 1 for every 3. They were fed by the same uprights, which were hollow inside the iron section and presumably connected to an underground pipe, which is now untraceable. One of the main objectives of the project is the reactivation of this water play after decades of dormancy. The solution was to insert along the outer wall of the basin below the water level a stainless steel pipe to which the new nozzles will be installed at the level of the original jets, which will have an inclination towards a basing of about 8 degrees with respect to the vertical axis, so as to ensure the scenic effect is shown in the historical views that the total flow rate of water play is expected to be 45 cubic meter of water per hour. And then another fountain that we had almost forgotten, the fountain of the star. It has not been possible to recover iconographic reference of the fountain of the star. However, Cambiaghi observed in 1757 in the middle of the Stradone there is a large stone star from which a great fountain of water springs, which rises more than 40 fathoms. Considering, therefore, that the Florentine arm is attributed the value of approximately 58 centimeters, it must be assumed that the jet of the fountain of the star must have risen to a considerable height of 23 meters. A jet around 12-meter high and a flow rate of approximately 6 cubic meters per hour is planned for the restoration of the water play. Finally, the Neptune Basin and the fountain. The water features that are visible in Neptune Basin can all be seen in the statuary that is placed in the center of the pool. There are 3 types of jets that will be restored. 2 arched jets spouting from dolphins placed at the water's edge on either side of the rock, a jet spouting vertically behind the statue, 3 jets spouting from Neptune's trident. Finally, I would like to conclude with a warning from Professor Francesco Guerrieri taken from Boboli 90, a very important international conference that took place in Florence in 1990. This quote, in my opinion, sums up the spirit with which we tried to approach the many issues related to the theme of sustainability, imagining Boboli as a laboratory of applied research with the core responsibility of the architect, restorer, the topographer, the petrographer, the physicist, the chemist, the botanist, the electronic technician, to make a comparative diagnostics to provide cross-reference information on the pathology of degradation, avoiding separation and separatism, insisting on separatism with the worst treatment of restoration papers and the most dangerous premise for accelerating degradation. An integrated laboratory for Boboli is the only technically serious way that can lead to conservation. Finally, allow me to thank the large group of researchers who collaborated in the drafting of the project. The University of Ferrara, in the person of Professor Marco Zuppero and Dr. Luca Cei, the National Research Council, in the person of Emma Cantisani, Cristiano Ramirez, and all the collaborating staff. And also the thesis student Erika Riviera Zugiani, who conducted in-depth historical research during her landscape architecture thesis, together with Professor Tessa Matteina, Professor Giorgio Galletta, Professor Lisa Gherardini, and also Matilda Pavarella, who carried out historical research during her dissertation of architecture together with Ruggero, Professor Maria Di Benedetto, Professor Barbara Chedini, and also Professor Luigi Zangheri. At this point, I would like to show you a video where we will try to show you what Boboli is going to be very soon.
Thank you very much for this contribute. So sorry we had run a little bit out of time. Now we have a coffee break. Because we are a little late, I kindly ask you to reduce it to a quarter of an hour. I think maybe it's enough because we are all inside here. So thank you very much and see you in 10 minutes, quarter of an hour at least. Thank you. Please, just an information for you. For those who want to visit the Uffizi galleries, please go to the staff desk to tell our collaborators when do you want to visit the Uffizi galleries. Thank you. Now, thank you. Please take your seats. Thank you. We are going to restart. Thank you. Dear guests, please take your seats. We are starting again. And I'm pleased to introduce you to the lecture of Marco Mozzo, director of Villa di Castello and La Petraia from the Direzione Regionale Musei della Toscana, and Valerio Tesi, director of Soprintendenza Archeologia, Belle Arti e Paesaggio per le province di Pisa e Livorno, with a lecture on the topic, the restoration of the animals grotto at Villa di Castello. Thank you very much.
Thank you, too. Thank you, Bianca. We apologize, but I prefer to speak in Italian in order to respect our time. Grazie. Il nostro intervento è diviso in due parti.
There will be two parts in my presentation. I will give you a brief presentation on the history of Grotta degli Animali, and then I will give the floor to my colleague, the superintendent architect of Pisa Livorno, who is going to talk about the project that was completed to restore the hydraulic system of the grotto, a project that has been going on for years. So since 2018, the Grotta degli Animali, the Cave of the Animals in the garden of the Medici Villa of Castello, known to all as the first example of a formal Italian garden, has been undergoing a complex restoration by the Regional Museums Directorate of Tuscany and the Superintendency of Florence to restore and reactivate its famous water features that for centuries have fascinated artists and travelers admiring this extraordinary work of hydraulic engineering. Is first figurative testimony that we also saw this morning dates back to the end of the 16th century. The painted lunette of the Flemish painter Justus van Ootens, belonging to the pictorial cycle, consisted of 17 lunettes that the Grand Duke Ferdinand I of Medici wanted to create for his Medici Villa in Aretino. Through this ancient iconographic source, it is possible to read the original morphology of the grotto in relation to the 16th century garden as it was designed at the behest of Cosimo I de' Medici by Niccolò di Raffaello Pericolo, known as Il Tribolo, who worked on it without completing the commission from 1539 to his death in 1550. In addition to the cave, in the center of the garden was a fountain of Venus Fiorenza, symbolizing the city of Florence, a capital of the duchy, preceded by the monumental fountain of Hercules and Theo, which alluded to the supremacy of Cosimo I, the supremacy over his adversaries. While in the upper part of the garden, Bartolomeo Manati's statue of the Apennines was to ideally delimit the geographical boundaries of his reign. The construction of the Grotta degli Animali, the first Medici example of a rustic grotto, was only completed at the end of the 16th century, probably around the 80s, thanks to the intervention of other architects and sculptors such as Davide Fortino, Giorgio Vasari, Bartolomeo Mannati, and Gian Bologna, who deviated from the initial project by Tribolo. The current entrance, very different from the 16th century one, is a result of the transformations dating back to the 1780s. This is a trefoil layout. It's characterized by 3 monumental pools, which are complemented in the upper part by tableaux vivants made of stone animals arranged in a scenographic and theatrical manner. According to recent studies, the decorations were meant to recall the 3 elements of earth, air, and water. The first was represented by the animals together with the plant component, mosses, maidenhairs, ferns, and the second by bronze birds placed at various points in the vaults. Now conserved in the Bargello Museum, while the third was represented by water games and marine decorations of the two side pools. Numerous testimonies from Vasari to Joseph Frutenbach compare the grotto, nicknamed the Grotto of the Flood, to a veritable scenic machine animated by the play of the more than 100 gushers that spouted from the floor and the bowls, driven by a complex hydraulic mechanism that exploited the falling pressure of the water, bathed in the marbles and stones with different colors of the animals, which was supposed to recall the original fur of the animals. Water was therefore the absolute protagonist, capable of enlivening this masterpiece, which in the eyes of visitors was to appear as a humid, sound-rich environment. Despite the literary fortune it enjoyed, it is probable that the ingenious hydraulic system had some problems to start. The presence of limescale, for example, caused the pipes to gradually clog to the point where they could no longer function properly, a situation that deteriorated to the present day due to the lack of maintenance of the installations and of the decorated surfaces, particularly since the mid 1980s. The Cultural Heritage Administration has decided to prohibit the access to the grotto to the public, and from the early 1919 onwards, to initiate a long season of restoration work, which is since 2018 has been carried out on the original hydraulic system through a complex restoration project, and on the other hand, the restoration of the decorated surfaces. This is underway. This is the image, and this is what is being conducted now. The projects and interventions were all accompanied by an intensive diagnostic and scientific investigation campaign by the National Research Center, the Department of Architecture, and the Department of Engineering of the University of Florence. And they carried out, as my colleague will tell you, the three-dimensional survey of the complex architecture of the grotto and its hydraulic system in order to understand the correct functioning of the hydraulic system. And I'd like to thank you. I'd like to give the floor to Valerio, who is going to explain the project in detail. Now, well, thank you. Well, thank you, Marco, for this kind introduction. I would like to thank you for having invited me to be with you. And I would like also to thank you for the presence of Giorgio Galletta, because in fact these images come from the interventions by Giorgio Galletti inside the cave, and also together with Isabella Lapi, and also Cristina Cerini, because what we're doing now is the continuation of the work and the studies and the surveys of previous researchers. And for me, it's a source of pride to work on the basis of what they've done. So we started working from where the previous researchers stopped. And so we first carried out an instrumental survey, because this complex hydraulic machine was not really well known. In the past, the water was actually sprouting from the soil, but already at the end of the 1700s, the water falling from above was no longer working. Well, in the 1500s, actually, the cave was called the Cave of the Flood, because water was coming from above, flooding the place. So we started carrying out a detailed survey of these inactive places from where the water was coming. So we looked at all the details. And as already pointed out by previous speakers, it is very important to plan conservation and restoration work. It is important to carefully analyze the current situation, and so it is very important to carry out a survey, especially in this environment. Well, it was quite difficult to connect the upper part with the internal part. This is the plan linking the different points on the vault with the elements from which the water was coming on the floor. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time, so I would like it to stick to the time allotted to me. So this is a very complex system that was designed by a master of water features by Il Tribolo. And you see a lot of degradation, a lot of deterioration due to the elements, to human intervention. So we cannot maintain these systems, but it was very important to preserve them as a very precious document of an incredible hydraulic machine of the 1500s. So this is what we started in the 90s, and so we discovered something. So we discovered in the lower part of the image of a network of lead conduits that apparently are not linked to some pipes inside, which meant that there was a modification between what was planned outside of the cave from what was inside the cave. This is important. This is another plan with a different projection. So thanks to Marco Mossi and Stefano Cascio, we will be able to have the possibility to understand how this complex hydraulic machine was working. This is a recent study that we carried out together with the civil engineering department of the Florence University. We've tried to describe how the system works. This is just a slide. We hope we're going to have a video for another conference. And you see how the different hydraulic pipes were working. Before I showed you a plan by Giuseppe Ruggeri in the mid-1700s. And you see how water was fed into the cave. And you see in the back of the cave, in the lateral sides, the blue line shows the path of the water. And then you see the water being fed into the jets on the floor and the lateral conduits, so that the water is then sent into a channel below the floor of the cave, which then fed the fountain of Hercules and Antaeus. So when Montaigne visited Castello in the 1500s, he was stupefied by the height of the water sprayed on the fountain, and this was due to the very sophisticated calculation of the hydraulic pressure of the water. And you see from the upper basin, the water was channeled through the cave, and then it was collected and it fed the fountain. This is the image of the fountain. of this fountain. And as already pointed out by Marco, this was a very sophisticated system. So we had to change the system, and we created a new system in order to revamp this cave of the flood by reactivating the water falling from the above, and which had not been active for 2 centuries because it was complex and difficult. So this is a very complex machine, but this machine also was a sign of the magnificence of the Medici family. So this was a very complicated technical machine, even if it didn't function for such a long time, but it was a sign of magnificence of Cosimo de' Medici. Well, we changed the system. We wanted to create a new system that is easier to maintain, and we have a pipe for each spot from which the water falls down. So we actually carefully perforated the cave, and also we reopened the vertical pipes. On the right-hand side, you see the simulation. Well, will this work? Let's see what happens. Let's see. Sorry, I've come to the end of the time allotted to me. So just very quickly, an illustration of some pictures. So I'll try to be very precise. So I'll have some, no, not many minutes. Okay, this is the system. This is the executive drawing of the president. Does it work? Yes, it does. So this is the new system. So we have protected the cave with this cover of what remained of the 1500 implant. We laid our new pipes, so 52 on the right and 52 on the left, with 2 collectors that now are used to regulate the pressure of the water, not too much, not too little, the right one, in order to revamp this cave as to the cave of flood. So water is a valuable resource. The 1500s, it was actually a little bit wasted, but now we have to preserve water. And so we now have to use water in a sophisticated way, because water then flows through different kinds of features made of bronze, stone. So we have to control the chemical and physical characteristics of the water, and then we have to recycle the water because water is too valuable. So this is a strong sign, and I see that Giorgio Galletto is looking at me. Yes, so we have created a kind of compensation chamber in the place where it does not interfere with the garden. It is a reinforced concrete reservoir in a 1500s garden. So we believe that this is probably a violence, a wound in the garden of the 1500s, of the 1700s, but we managed to acquire unknown information on the hydraulic system. This is kind of relaunch chamber. So we take the water that falls from the cave, we treat it, and we push it back, and so we do not waste it, but that's not enough. Let's go very quickly. And so we need also to treat the water. So below the largest collection of citrus trees, we have introduced a chemical and physical treatment plant for the water. I say it is a very large water reservoirs, so we wanted to reduce our water consumption, and so we tried to study the water consumption Of course, we need to make the garden more sustainable. Also, consumption of electricity because we have pumps, however, but a careful management of the garden will allow us to have a greater idea, a more precise idea. I no longer deal with this cave, and I thank Marco Mosso for having called me to talk together with him because I've had a passion for this work for a long time. Now I leave the director of the garden the problem of actually finalize a project and finalize the projects. And now we have to arrange the garden even more, especially to revamp the traces of the 1700s. Well, this is the stimulus for the pyramid that was created in the garden. And then I finished. That's the end. I would like to actually quote a friend, a master, Cristina Cedilli, who wrote in 1992 about this cave. The bronze decoration had been removed, and now it is stored in the Bargello Museum. And she proposed, and I quote, within the framework of a general intervention of restoration of this environment, it is important to reintroduce the faithful copy of all the birds to be installed on the ceiling to restore the iconographic and figurative original iconography. And this is my wish for the director, because we have to capitalize on what we learned from Cristina.
Grazie Marco, grazie Valerio, grazie anche per la sintesi. Thank you very much for your contribution. We keep on going with, it's a very hard challenge. Polish names are extremely, Maciej Zolnierczuk, am I right? More or less, you're so polite, thank you. I know that I did it wrong, but thank you very much. With a lecture from the gardens of the Museum of King Jan III Palace at Wilanów in Warsaw, with a lecture on the topic, different ways to care for the purity of water reservoirs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that my last name is very difficult, so you can call me Magic. Yeah, Magic. Yeah. Okay. Let's start the presentation. I know that some of you were on the forum at the last year, and at the last year I have a presentation about the problems that we have with the water on the Wilanów. Today I would like to talk a little bit about the solutions, what we want to do or what we have done with our waters. As you can see on this slide, this is the Wilanów Lake, which is the old oxbow of Vistula River. And I would like to concentrate on the big waters, like this lake that you see on this slide. Our water problems have got a long history. It takes about 50 years. Over here you can see a few print screens from the movie that you could see in the 1979 about the Służewiecki stream that is coming to the Wilanowskie lake. And as you can see, one of the problem is a pollution. You can see this on this slide. And I have to say that the situation is is not better than you can see on the slide. We're trying to do something, but our main problem is the city, because the city is polluting us from these 50 years. How it's possible? Well, it's all about this small stream that we called Służewiecki stream, because the catchment area of this stream is 10% of the Warsaw city. So you can imagine how many things are coming to this lake. Of course, we are trying to do something. Over here you can see the old photos where there was the idea to clean sediments from the lake. You can see the old techniques. It's about some kind of excavator on the platform that was on the lake. But right now we're trying to find some other solutions. Why? Because these sediments that we have right now are most worse than it was 25 years ago. Over here, you can see how it looks like right now. It's awful, and it stinks. So if we use this excavator, probably all people that live in our district will be very grateful for a big headache for a long time. Yeah. So we are trying to do something different. We're looking for the solutions. But of course, if we want to fight with this enemy, we have to find the characteristic of this. So we make the analysis of the sediments that we have at the Wilanów Lake. On the right side, you can see the table where I mark on the pink color the elements that are higher than the norm. It should be in norm. So you can see there are lots of them. Another problem is that at Wilanów Lake we will find the elements that have got cancerogenic properties, toxic properties, and mutagenic properties. So it's not so easy to take it just away and drop it somewhere else. Yeah. What's interesting that we can divide our lake for two zones. One zone is in the central point, yeah, and it's coming on the east-north. This is very interesting because this is the way where the water is coming through the Wilanowski stream, which is over here, to the Vistula River. Another zone is over here, and over here we have got more biomass elements. So it's much more clean. Okay, so we know the characteristic. What we can do? Well, sometimes it looks just like on those photos. You can see the sediments that are on the top. Yeah, there's no water. Sometimes there is about 20 centimeters of the water, and this is our main problem, and we want to do something with this. We're trying to look for something, and we go for some kind of trip to the Brwinów. It's about 40 kilometers from Warsaw. It's a small village, but they have got park. And I please for a first movie. Okay. I just want to show you how do they clean the sediments from the pond that is in the Wilanów Park, Brwinów Park, sorry. Also not books, but small holes. And the sediment stays inside this balloon, but the water is coming outside. May I please one more time for the movie? I just want to show you what is the quality of the water. Please look over here. It's clean. It's very clean. And we would like to take this technique also to the Wilanów. How it looks like, I would like to come back to my presentation. I hope it's possible. Okay, we are coming back. So if we want to look to this technique, we will see the vacuum cleaner. It's over here, but it's much more bigger than we have in our apartments. From this vacuum cleaner, the sediments are going with the pipes to this big balloon, and from there, the water is coming back to the pond. What is very important that this vacuum cleaner sucks everything from the bottom of the lake. So there's no big contact with the water. So the water is still clean in this pond. Yeah. And of course, we would like to make the same technique in our area, but we also know that this is the solution only for a few years. Yeah. But after these few years, we'll make it one more time at the more, and as you can, yeah, we have to make it few times more. That's why we start to think to make some kind of consortium between the companies, and maybe it will happen. So right now we have got one company that remove our sediments. We find another company that can make from the sediments some fertilizer. Another company could prepare for us the technique to put in our lake the oxygen. So it should be much more clean than it's right now. Another thing is that we also try to put some kind of bacterial into our lake, but we don't know how it works. Yeah, that's why we make a small pilot study. We make it only in this south pond, and we're trying to observe how it works. Is it okay? Is it enough for us? Because we were trying to do such a pilot study with other companies, and it doesn't work because we have water that is the flowing waters, and the bacteria just go away with the water. Yeah. So we will see. I hope that at the next forum I will show you clean water. Another thing is removal of algae. You can see how it looks in the summertime, and we also try to remove it. We use the mechanical technique. It is some kind of platform with, we can say that this is some kind of bulldozer that is coming through this North Bay with the net and the front, and it takes everything what is under the water, but also what is on the water. So this is one of the elements. But we also try to clean the channel of Sobieski. It's over here. Yeah. It is very strange and hard place to do something because this orange area over here is a nature reserve. On the north side, you will see the fields. So it should be easy to take just tree, put on the fields, and that's all. But we are not the owner of these fields. So we have to do something on the channel. So I would like to please for a second movie. And over here you will see also some kind of platform. And we are trying to remove the windbreak trees that are inside. But we don't want to remove all the trees, because we know that this is also some kind of characteristic element for the landscape that we have over here. So we're trying to remove 25–30% of those trees to make just a road for the leaves that are on the top of the water, to make just simply way for them. So over here you can see how this bulldozer works. In this option we remove those two trees that you can see over here, but another trees will be removed in this year, and this will be only this 25%. Okay. Okay, it's fine. Let's go for another slide. I just want to show you how it looks at the beginning. You can see the lots of leaves that are on the top of the water, and you can see the effect after just one day. Yeah? So it's quite good. At the end, I would like to tell you about a special local development plan. It's a draft that we get just 2 weeks ago, and we prepare comments because it's also connected with the water. In this document, you will find also some information what we can do with our waters. For example, if we don't prepare comments, we will don't have chance to rebuild system of the channels at the nature reserve area. We don't have the chance to rebuild the old area of the stream. Another thing is that the planists make for us water log, but at the wrong location, because if they make over here the water log, there will be no water. There will be not enough water for the nature reserve. So it's totally disaster for the nature reserve and for the pond that is also over here. So we have to take it on the north. So I have to say that this document was very interesting, but we prepare 169 comments, and we hope that all of them will be in the future in the plan. So, okay, I'm trying to make my presentation as fast as it's possible because I know it's a little bit late. So thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much. Now that you have allowed us, all of us, to call you just by name, thank you, Maciej. Okay, so last but not least, I'm pleased to introduce the last lecture of this very deep and important day from the colleague Paola Viola, salvaguardia e valorizzazione del complesso del Parco della Reggia di Caserta, with a lecture on the topic Acquedotto Carolino, from the Kingdom's Water Resource to a Sustainability Challenge. Thank you, Paola.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Sorry for emotion. And thanks for this opportunity to share with you some activities carried out by a Museum Reggia di Caserta. Okay. Reggia di Caserta, we usually don't translate its name, is a complex system, including the big square, the palace, the gardens, the San Silvestro wood, and the aqueduct called Acquedotto Carolino in honor of the King Carlo di Borbone. In particular, the park covers an area of about 123 hectares, plus 76 of San Silvestro wood. And now, with a new approach, we really like to consider it as a green museum and a suggestive landscape system in which there are different types of gardens. For example, grand parterre or formal garden, old wood, waterway, via d'acqua, and the English garden, and external of the Royal Park, the San Silvestro wood. And this garden have a specific conservation need, naturally. These are some data about our gardens, and as you can see, we have big numbers. For example, a lot of important botanical collection as Camellia japonica, and a lot of monumental trees, and more 50 ongoing projects, which are for us a very big challenge. The gardens of Caserta were a leisure place of the royal family and the court, but at the same time, they were a place for productive activities, such as hunting, fishing, agriculture, and botanical experiments. And recently, the museum has launched some activities to repropose this aspect. Just for example, the collection of oranges to produce jam, or a production of digestive bitterness with plants from an English garden, and production of wine. And most important, the recycling of wood. In this context, the water was always the primary resource. So the project by King Carlo di Borbone and architect Luigi Vanvitelli included also an aqueduct to supply water to palace, to gardens, and a new city was forming. And it was useful also for factories, mills, fish ponds. The construction began in 1753. And on May 20, in 1764, water arrived at the park, gushing out in the same place that Vanvitelli, 12 years earlier, had identified and marked with the wooden plank. In my opinion, Vanvitelli was a genius, but I think you are agree. This is a long route of aqueduct. So, the Acquedotto Carolino is over 38 kilometers long, mostly underground, and its main elements are sources at slopes of Monte Taburno, 5 mountain tunnels, 13 bridges, and the largest called Ponte della Valle in the picture, 67 torrini or small towers, small construction for venting and controlling the flow of the water. Before reaching the park, this masterpiece supply water to 47 factories, above all the very famous Salleuccio silk factories. In the park, it fed fountains, gush, pools, and fish ponds were intended for the fishing, for the royal table, and for the sail. This is some picture about aqueduct, the route of aqueduct. Okay. Now, to repropose a self-sufficient management model, the museum has proposed an ambitious project, the construction of a new efficient and sustainable irrigation system that takes advantage from the aqueduct, only from the aqueduct, financed by a national recovery plan. With this fund, we are carrying out other 3 projects: requalification of San Silvestro wood, restoration of fountains with sculptural groups, and adjustment of some section of the Carolino aqueduct. And this is our challenge. We know that historic water system is very important for the park and English garden, and it must be preserved and enhanced for its relationship with both architectural and botanical elements. The dimension and the botanical heritage of our gardens require careful irrigation, not only for aesthetic impact, but also to preserve this botanical heritage, considering the age and the value of a lot of trees, above all the monumental trees. About irrigation of turf or turf grass, we have to consider the type of lawn, architectural, informal garden, and spontaneous in prairies. And these needs must be related to a functional use of water resource, very important today. Let's see why we need a new irrigation system. The system actually in use is a very complicated issue for us. Two problems all around the park. For example, to irrigate the turf grasses along the waterway or via d'acqua, we have to use a diesel motor pump to take water directly from fountains and temporary external pipes with a very bad visual impact and consequent pollution for use to fuel. So we have very bad effects. And more, in the Grand Parterre, the system includes 2 wells with the pumps, the 2 tanks, and 2 booster pumps. In total, 4 pumps, powered by the same electric panel. And for this reason, they cannot operate at the same time. So the gardeners must place the sprinklers manually. In only one part of Grand Parterre, we have pop-up or dynamic sprinklers. Also in the English garden, in only one part, we have automatic system. And also in this garden, we need for workers, for gardeners. In all other areas of gardens are irrigated with the aid of tankers, as you can see in the picture on my right. In conclusion, the irrigation systems in use are inadequate, obsolete, and present critical issues. For example, waste of water, high consumption of electricity and fuels with consequent pollution, need for the presence of workers, and external technical elements with very bad impact, and interference with a museum opening also. For this reason, we have planned a new automatic water distribution system in order to obtain an homogeneous irrigation. Let's see the purposes of this project. Gravity system that exclusively exploit the natural differential level of the park and the water flow rate of the Acquedotto Carolino and the monumental waterfall. A system good for historic garden with only underground pipes and the retractable sprinkles, arranged according to a scheme that considers the presence of big trees and above all the monumental trees, in order to reduce the damage, for example, the direct jet on trunks. Homogeneous irrigation coverage, a centralized control system, and turf grasses regeneration. After the purposes, let's see the project requirements. In the slide, you can see all the requirements, but for example, ecological compatibility or use of excavated materials, shutdown and restart in case of rain, wind, or critical temperature, centralized control system, even remotely so, and the positioning of the elements where the presence of the visitor is less frequent. And now the expected results. First of all, the new system will guarantee a functional and sustainable use of water coming exclusively from Acquedotto Carolino, which still supplies the Reggia. Secondly, the irrigation system will guarantee an organic management of historic garden. Moreover, we know that water is of excellent quality, as shown by analysis. And in addition, the system will only be used during the night, different from today, because now we must use the system during the day, even during the hottest hours in the summer, for example. And so is very important for us because we can reduce the impact during the the museum opening. And above all, the irrigation cycles will be programmed only if necessary, without use of electricity. I hope I'm on time. And okay, thank you.
Really hope people don't get scared of me now because, well, thank you very much, Paola. We ended all the lectures of this very deep and important and full of knowledge day that we shared together. First of all, in conclusion, and before giving the stage to our great Vice President, Lukasz Przybyłak, and giving some time for some questions or a discussion, let me thank all the lecturers for the contribute they gave today in sharing knowledge and culture. And thank to all of you, to all the participants to the forum. The consciousness of the value we are all called to preserve and maintain and to promote too transforms our everyday work into a common sense of responsibility that declines itself into a continuous act of care. It's, according to what I always think, giving a voice to all the shades of the beauty of the garden, to their role in the roots of our common European identity, to the narration of our common story. The voice of the garden, we know, is often a silent voice or a very soft one. And taking care of our historic gardens is most of times a work behind the scenes. So let me take this occasion to thank all the people that work every day in Boboli Gardens and in all the departments of our museums, to the great staff and to all the people behind the scenes that made this day possible for all of us. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Please give a face to all of you, guys, please. Yes, thank you. Yes. Thank you also to the staff of the garden department, botanic department, not just for today's, my great team, but for your everyday work. I would like to mention all of you by name, but the time is running, so I am the first that must be on time. And thanking all of you once again. I leave the speech to Lukasz, and then if we have time, there is some time left for some question or discussion. But please, Lukasz, for the final conclusion of the forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bianca. Thank you, dear guests and friends. We have managed it. It was really exciting and extraordinary day with full of thoughts. And as Bianca told, all of your presentations are building a common voice regarding the conservation of history gardens. And this is actually a perfect occasion to present you the very first issue of our newest publication that is made by the European Road of History Gardens, named Green Herald. So every single garden from our association is a herald itself, who is telling the beautiful stories about gardens. And after each forum, we will publish this kind of publication. So this is number one, which presents the texts and presentations from the last year forum, which was held by our dear friends from Hungary. So I'm looking forward to the second issue of this, which will be quite bright, I think. Thanks, for example, to Paola Ruggieri, which presentation was really amazing and full of details. So please support us with your texts after the conference. Stay in touch with Ana Rosa Moreno and Francesca Sborgi, I guess, as well, regarding sending the materials. I wish you a pleasant lecture after the conference. And because I have got this privilege to close the forum, I would like also to underline that this is the second forum in the newest formula, meaning that the morning session was devoted to the broad approach on history gardens and history gardens conservation. And the second part, as we have seen, was connected with the not so pleasant aspects of restoration, meaning challenges in which all of us are also united. But taking the opportunity to speak at the end of this event, I would like also to draw your attention on the main mission of the European Road of History Gardens. I will do it really fast, so do not worry. As a certified Council of Europe Cultural Road, we are an instrument for implementing the Council of Europe's policy on the cultural level. Although we often forget it, modern gardens have always been a space for the implementation of politics and diplomacy, both local and international as well. Similarly to the styles in garden art, the tone of political manifestations hidden in gardens has also been changing. During the Renaissance, for example, the message was full of symbolic messages, sometimes understood only by a narrow circle of people. There were also tongue-in-cheek touches, such as water surprises, to surprise unsuspecting visitors. The 17th and the 18th centuries were a time of an increasingly strong and rough diplomatic tone. The fascination with the absolutist mechanism of government and the social division that grew with it resounded with numerous, almost theatrical treatments. The prevailing impression of the gardens at the time was of splendor, power, and the resulting intimidation of visiting ambassadors. The end of the 18th century, and so the entire 19th century, is when the garden space begins to be a place of expression of national pride, colonial power, and melancholic longing for lost ideals. The 20th century is a unique time in the history of gardens. It gives voice to social needs signaled by pushed visions of so-called garden cities. Women came to prominence and international recognition in garden design, to mention, for example, Gertrude Jekyll at the turn of the 20th century. The context of the garden also became the backdrop for groundbreaking geopolitical decisions in Europe in the 20th century. To this day, for example, the flower bed in the Cecilienhof courtyard in Potsdam is planted in the shape of the Star of the Soviet Union, as it was in 1945, during the famous conference establishing a new order to Europe. Today, in the 21st century, gardens are a wonderful space for the expression of symbolic diplomatic gestures. Whether a commemorative tree is planted by representatives of the local government institutions or heads of state and monarchs, the very act of planting tree together is the most beautiful diplomatic gesture possible and an expression of hope for a stable future. Personally, I am a great supporter of incorporating diplomatic gestures into the restoration programs of history gardens, and I strongly invite you all to do the same in your sites. The 21st century is also a time when the space of history gardens becomes the stage for political manifestations of international importance, as we experienced it earlier this year in the gardens of the Royal Castle in Warsaw. When looking at gardens, we must also not overlook the many threats from the difficult cultural past of the continent and the world, social inequalities and discrimination. Although it is hard to believe, many of these unpleasant events and historical moments are behind the creation of the most beautiful gardens. Difficult moments, both those in the past, but also those we are experiencing now and which will intensify in the future, are also the lens through which we should look at our gardens. As we heard today, in the second part of the forum, our gardens are also uniting in the face of increasingly strong challenges. Uniting in the face of them and working out remedial models should also be one of the missions we fulfill as the Cultural Road of Council of Europe. We should not also underestimate the ability of historic gardens to respond and adapt to social needs, and in the case of our Cultural Road, cultural tourism and cultural sustainability are one of the core objectives of our mission. So, regarding the mission of the Cultural Road. The mission of the Cultural Roads of the Council of Europe, including ours, is to implement policies for the protection of human rights, cultural diversity, intercultural dialogue, and cross-border exchange. In a word, through the prism of gardens as natural and cultural phenomena, we strengthen the ties and unity. On this slide, you could see the main 5 fields of our activity. We've built the backbone of our trail activities. That include cooperation in research and development, enhancement of memory, history, and European heritage, cultural and educational exchange for young Europeans, contemporary cultural and artistic practice, cultural tourism, and sustainable cultural development. It is not without the reason that I have emphasized the word cooperation, as the success of a road will depend entirely on the cooperation of its members. So, for example, how we could cooperate in the first point of the main mission of the Cultural Road. European garden art is literally an ocean of motifs and themes that can bring gardens together in wonderful research projects. An example of that theme that I encourage you all to explore, for example, is the decorative elements used in our gardens. Before today's meeting, and completely I didn't plan it with Miss Contessa, I took a look at mid-19th century sculpture of so-called Boy with the Swan. I have briefly identified the work of art by Theodor Kalide, who was the author of this sculpture, in some of 22 historic gardens across Europe. In the context of this sculpture, common research topics can also be developed to include the context in which this decoration became widespread in European gardens and so on. As I told you before, we are swimming in an ocean of the common motifs. I take this opportunity as well to look very warmly at Miss Contessa and my dearest friends from the Wilanów Palace in Warsaw, who had the same sculpture in their garden, so that maybe they could explore this motif under the patronage of the European Road of Historic Gardens. But the common link between our gardens are above all, as Albert Fekete mentioned today, the people. Based on the biographies of the figures who founded the gardens, but also of those who created them, it is possible to build research alliances that contribute to the activity of our road. I take this opportunity to introduce you the patron of the European Center for Garden Art, Eduard Petzold, as an example. The European Center for Garden Art is a collaborator of our road, and through the prism of Eduard Petzold's European heritage, it carries out its programs and activities involving our road as well. And when we are speaking about the European Center for Garden Art and involvement of the private people, I would like as well to mention the name of our independent collaborator, Jacek Kuśmierski. The research and the scientific work carried out by him has contributed significantly to the dynamics of our road activity. This is exemplified not only by the leading theme of our meeting, A Europe of United Gardens, but also by the publication that was produced under our patronage and that was distributed to you today morning. I encourage you to read this book and learn more about the role that we as a group and each of the gardens individually have to play in the field of the cultural policy of the Council of Europe and the European Union. In this book, you will find as well a warning. In 1992, a cultural road for historic gardens was already born. And due to the lack of activity, it did not pass the certification period and was dissolved 2 years after its foundation. I would also like to emphasize at this point that membership of Council of Europe or the European Union is not a criteria for the basis of which we select new members. Europe and our cultural identity is one. We are all part of it. The strength of our road, this kind of garden union, lies in the activity of our members. That's why I'm asking you to be as active as possible in the life of our road. It is only thanks to your activity that it will be strongly visible on the map of Europe. So, as a final word, I would like to thank you once again for your perfect participation and preparation for the forum. And what could I say more? Great grazie mille to our Italian friends for organization of this perfect event, but as well, huge muchas gracias to our friends and colleagues from Spain, Ana Rosa Moreno and her team who prepared perfect materials for this conference, our dearest friends from Lloret de Mar, the magic city where the entire Garden Union was born in 2016. So once again, thank you very much. Let's stay together And as I wrote here, let us be always united in a common journey through centuries of shared history. Thank you very much.
So now the end is really near, as one famous song said, but we still maybe take some minutes, if you like, for eventually some questions or discussion. If someone of you have something to say or to ask to our lecturers or some consideration to express, we can take 10 minutes to discuss about it before officially ending this day of forum. No one? Like at school? Don't be shy. No one, maybe? Okay, so I officially declare closed this first day. I waited all my life to say that. No kidding, but we are pleased to share another moment together tonight at the gala dinner in Villa Bardini. I heard that some of you, most of you, want to walk till Villa Bardini. It's a very nice walk. And otherwise, please, those of you who haven't already done it can go to the staff desk to book the transfer service. And see you at 7:45 at Villa Bardini, Costa San Giorgio 4. But please, just 1 minute left before the very end. I would like to thank in a very special way the two persons that worked with me together for months for this forum. And without them, it wouldn't be possible to do it. Francesca Sborgi and Anna Rosa Moreno. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Now you're free, and see you in Villa Bardini for the gala dinner. Thank you very much.